The medical bay of the USS Relentless was filled with wounded soldiers and rescued civilians. Doctors and nurses moved between patients, treating injuries and offering comfort. The smell of medicine and burnt metal hung in the air. Katie sat on a medical bed while a nurse cleaned the cut on her lip. Around her, the other human scientists were being examined. Greg had a broken arm. Linda needed stitches on her shoulder. Tony had a concussion. But they were alive. All 12 of them were alive. Ambassador Torvan stood in the corner of the medical bay, watching everything with his large compound eyes. He had never seen anything like this before. The humans around him were exhausted, injured, and grieving for their fallen soldiers. Yet somehow, they also seemed proud. Happy, even. A young Marine walked past, his arm in a sling. He noticed Torvan and stopped. "You okay, Ambassador?" The Marine asked. "Do you need anything?" Torvan shook his head slowly. "I am unharmed, thank you. I was simply observing." The Marine nodded and continued on his way, as if helping an alien diplomat was the most normal thing in the world. Admiral Cortez entered the medical bay a few hours later. He had spent the time since the battle directing rescue operations, recovering escape pods, and counting the dead. 214 human lives lost. Each one was a name he would have to memorize, a letter he would have to write, a family he would have to notify. But first, he wanted to see the people they had saved. He found Katie sitting alone, staring out a small window at the stars. The gas giant Kethris 7 glowed softly in the distance, its clouds swirling in endless storms. "Dr. Morrison?" he said gently. Katie turned to look at him. She recognized the rank symbols on his uniform. "Admiral Cortez, I do not know what to say. Thank you seems too small." Cortez sat down beside her. "There is no need for thanks, Doctor. You called. We answered. That is simply what we do." Katie was quiet for a moment. 214 people died coming to save us. 12 lives for 214. That cannot be right. That cannot be fair. Cortez looked at her with understanding in his eyes. "Dr. Morrison, let me tell you something. Every person in this fleet volunteered for this mission. Every single one. They knew the risks. They knew some of them would not come home. And they came anyway. But why?" Katie asked. "Why would they die for strangers?" Cortez considered the question carefully before answering. "Because that is what makes us human. We protect each other. Not because it is logical. Not because it is efficient. But because it is right. Because every human life matters. Because we refuse to live in a universe where we abandon our own to suffer and die alone." Tears rolled down Katie's cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said. "I should be stronger." "You are strong," Cortez replied. "You survived. You kept your people together. You sent the signal that saved all of your lives. That took courage." He stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Rest now, Doctor. We will have you home soon." As Cortez left the medical bay, he found Ambassador Torvan waiting for him in the corridor. The Valori diplomat looked troubled, his antennae twitching nervously. "Admiral," Torvan said, "may I speak with you?" Cortez nodded. "Of course, Ambassador. Walk with me." They moved through the corridors of the Relentless together. Around them, crew members worked to repair damage and care for the wounded. The ship felt tired but proud. "I have been observing your people," Torvan began. "I have been trying to understand what I witnessed today. I must confess, Admiral, I am having difficulty." "What troubles you?" "You came for 12 people," Torvan said. 12 ordinary researchers. You brought 93 warships. You fought a battle that cost hundreds of lives. You risked everything." He stopped walking and looked at Cortez directly. "My government would never do such a thing. No government in the Galactic Concord would do such a thing. The cost is too high. The logic is wrong. Cortez smiled slightly. Ambassador, you are right. The logic is wrong. By any rational calculation, what we did today makes no sense. We should have negotiated. We should have paid ransom. We should have waited for a better opportunity. Then why did you not? Because we are not purely rational creatures, Cortez replied. We are humans. We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us every moment of every day. We survived by sticking together, by protecting our tribe, by never abandoning those who needed us. He resumed walking, and Torvan followed. When I was young, Cortez continued, my grandmother told me a story. She said that long ago, on ancient Earth, our ancestors lived in small groups on dangerous plains filled with predators. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor. They were weak compared to the beasts that hunted them. But they had something else. They had each other. They knew that if one of them was hurt, the others would carry them. If one of them was lost, the others would search for them. If one of them was in danger, the others would fight for them. He stopped at a window and looked out at the stars. That instinct, that bond, is written deep in our nature. It is who we are. When Dr. Morrison sent her signal, she was calling out to her tribe. And her tribe answered. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but because that is what tribes do. Torvan was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised Cortez. I envy you, Admiral. Cortez raised an eyebrow. Envy? Why? My species lives for 300 years. We have colonized dozens of worlds. We have achieved great things in art and science and philosophy. But we have never had what you have. We have never had that connection, that willingness to die for each other, that loyalty that goes beyond logic. He touched his chest with a thin, trembling hand. When the Kreth attacked the station, my first thought was to save myself. I looked for a place to hide. I calculated my chances of survival. I thought of ways to negotiate, to bargain, to surrender. His voice grew quiet with shame. But your Dr. Morrison? Her first thought was to warn her people, to call for help, not for herself, but for others. Even when she had no reason to believe help would come. Cortez put his hand on the ambassador's shoulder. That is not something to feel shame about, Ambassador. Your instincts are different from ours. That does not make them wrong. It just makes them different. Perhaps, Torvan replied. But I think I understand now why the galaxy fears your kind. Fears us? Yes, not because you are violent, though you can be. Not because you are powerful, though you are growing stronger every day. But because you are loyal, because you will not stop, because you will never give up on your own. His compound eyes met Cortez's gaze. The Kreth thought they were taking hostages. They thought they were gaining leverage. Instead, they awakened something terrible. They awakened the fury of a species that would cross 600 light years and sacrifice hundreds of lives for 12 strangers. Torvan shook his head slowly. No wonder they call you Deathworlders. You are not just creatures who survived a deadly planet. You are creatures who carry that deadliness inside you, that refusal to accept defeat, that unstoppable determination. And you use it not for conquest, but for protection. That is terrifying, Admiral. And it is beautiful. Cortez did not know what to say. He had never thought of humanity in those terms. To him, they had simply done what needed to be done. But perhaps that was exactly Torvan's point. Somewhere across the galaxy, word of the battle was spreading. Species that had dismissed humanity as newcomers were suddenly paying attention. The Kreth Dominion was withdrawing from 3 contested systems. The Galactic Concord was discussing a formal alliance with Earth, and in 100 alien capitals. Leaders asked themselves the same question. What kind of species sends 93 warships to save 12 civilians? The answer was simple: humans. The sky tore open with light, and hope came screaming through. Admiral Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge of the USS Sentinel as her second fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly behind the Keth formation. 18 fresh warships, their weapons fully charged, their crews hungry for battle. All ships fire at will, she ordered. The Keth fleet, caught between two human forces, erupted in chaos. War leader Keseth watched in horror as his rear guard was torn apart by the newcomers. Ships that had been moments from victory now found themselves fighting for survival. Commander Cole felt his heart surge with relief as he saw the second fleet's markers appear on his tactical display. All units, push forward. They're trapped between us. Show them what happens when you threaten our friends. The battle turned in an instant. The Keth, outnumbered now and surrounded, began to falter. Their formation broke as captains tried to find a way to escape the trap. But Keseth was not finished. He had not conquered 12 worlds by giving up when things became difficult. If he could not win in space, he would win on the ground. Launch the dropships, he ordered. All assault troops to the surface. Take the capital. Kill their leaders. Hundreds of Keth dropships fell toward Ashara Prime like burning meteors. The human fleet tried to stop them, but too many slipped through the defensive fire. They crashed into the streets of the capital city, and Keth soldiers poured out, weapons blazing. The Valari had no army. They had city guards who carried ceremonial weapons and had never seen real combat. Against the hardened Keth shock troops, they fell like grass before a storm. Captain Cruz heard the reports coming in from the surface and made his decision immediately. All available Marine units, prepare for combat drop. We're going down there. Lieutenant Kevin Drake was already suiting up when Cruz reached the hangar bay. The big Marine was checking his rifle with calm, practiced movements. Around him, 50 other Marines were doing the same. Lieutenant, Cruz said, Elder Morvith and the Council are trapped in the government building. A large Keth force is moving toward them. You need to get there first. Drake nodded. We'll get it done, sir. The Marine dropship fell through the atmosphere, shaking violently as anti-aircraft fire exploded around it. Drake held on tight and thought about the mission. He had been a soldier for 15 years. He had fought on a dozen worlds against a dozen enemies. But he had never fought for anything that felt as important as this. These Valari had never asked for war. They had spent their lives healing others. They did not deserve what was happening to them. The dropship hit the ground hard, and the doors blew open. Drake was the first one out, his boots hitting the broken street as he scanned for threats. The capital city was burning. Smoke filled the air. Somewhere nearby, he could hear weapons fire and screaming. Move out, he ordered. Stay tight. Watch the rooftops. They ran through the ruined streets toward the government building. Everywhere they looked, they saw destruction. Bodies lay in the gutters. Buildings had collapsed from weapons fire. The Keth were not here to conquer. They were here to destroy. Drake's squad reached the main plaza just as the Keth assault force was surrounding the government building. At least 200 enemy soldiers were setting up positions, preparing to storm the entrance where a handful of Valari guards were making their last stand. 50 against 200, one of Drake's Marines muttered. Great odds. Drake smiled grimly. I've had worse. Set up firing positions. We hit them hard and fast. No mercy. The Marines opened fire from behind the Keth lines. Their weapons were superior, their training was better, and they had the element of surprise. The first volley cut down 30 Keth soldiers before they even knew what was happening. The battle for the government building became a nightmare of close combat. The Keth outnumbered the Marines 4-1, but the humans refused to fall back. They fought from building to building, room to room, using every trick they knew to hold the enemy at bay. Drake himself killed 14 Keth soldiers in the first 10 minutes. He moved through the smoke like a ghost, appearing suddenly to strike down enemies before vanishing again. His Marines followed his example, fighting with a fury that shocked the Keth, but numbers told. The Marines began to fall. One by one, they went down, wounded or killed. Drake took a plasma burn across his shoulder that nearly dropped him. He gritted his teeth against the pain and kept fighting. Inside the government building, Elder Morvith and his council huddled in the central chamber. They could hear the fighting outside, getting closer with every passing minute. The Valari guards at the doors looked terrified. They knew they could not stop what was coming. Then the doors exploded inward, and Keth soldiers poured through. Morvith closed his eyes, ready for death. He had lived a long life. He had served his people well. If this was the end, he would face it with dignity. But death did not come. Instead, he heard human voices shouting and the roar of human weapons. He opened his eyes to see Lieutenant Drake standing in the doorway, his rifle blazing, his uniform torn and burned. Behind him, a handful of Marines fought with desperate courage against the Keth force. The fighting was brutal and brief. When it was over, 12 Keth soldiers lay dead in the council chamber. Drake stood over Morvith, bleeding from 3 wounds, swaying on his feet but refusing to fall. "Are you hurt, sir?" Drake asked. Morvith stared at the human soldier in amazement. "You came for us. You came through all of that for us." Drake smiled through the pain. "That's the job, sir." He collapsed a moment later, his strength finally giving out. The surviving Marines rushed to their lieutenant's side, applying medical aid with practiced hands. Outside, the tide was turning. Human reinforcements were landing across the city. The Keth assault force, cut off from their fleet and facing growing resistance, began to break. Some tried to flee. Some surrendered. Some fought to the death dot in orbit. Admiral Monroe's fleet was crushing what remained of the Keth armada. War leader Kesseth, seeing his defeat was complete, tried to escape in his flagship. The USS Guardian cut him off and disabled his engines. Kesseth was captured alive. He would face justice for the plague he had created and the millions he had murdered. As the sun set over the capital city, Elder Morvith sat beside Lieutenant Drake in the makeshift hospital that had been set up in the council chamber. The human soldier was stable now, sleeping peacefully while his wounds healed. Morvith watched him breathe and wondered at the strange fate that had brought these humans to his world. They had asked for nothing. They had expected nothing. They had simply come because they heard a cry for help, and they had given everything to answer it. Morvith reached out and gently took the sleeping soldier's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." Outside, the stars were coming out, and human ships still circled in the sky, watching over the world they had saved. The silence was strange after so much noise. For days, the skies of Ashara Prime had been filled with fire and thunder. Now there was only the soft wind and the distant sound of reconstruction crews clearing the rubble. Elder Morvith walked through the capital city and saw. His world changed forever. Buildings that had stood for 1,000 years were now ruins. Streets that had known only peace were scarred with the marks of battle. Everywhere he looked, he saw damage that would take generations to repair. But his people were alive. The plague was being cured. The Keth were gone. And for all of this, he had the humans to thank. The cost of the battle was enormous. Admiral Monroe's staff had given him the numbers, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. 14 human ships destroyed. Over 2,000 sailors dead. On the ground, nearly 300 Marines had given their lives defending a world they had never seen before. 2,000 lives. 2,000 families back on Earth who would never see their loved ones again. 2,000 futures erased so that the Valari could have a future of their own. Morvith did not know how to carry such a debt. He did not know if it could ever be repaid. The memorial service was held in the great plaza at the center of the capital. It was the same plaza where the fiercest fighting had occurred, where Lieutenant Drake and his Marines had held the line against impossible odds. The scars of battle were still visible on the surrounding buildings, but the plaza itself had been cleared and cleaned. Thousands of Valari gathered to pay their respects. They stood in silence as human honor guards carried the flags of the fallen. They watched as soldiers they had never met were remembered with words of love and grief. Captain Daniel Cruz stood at the front of the gathering with Admiral Lisa Monroe and the other surviving officers. His uniform was clean and pressed, but exhaustion showed in his eyes. He had not slept properly since the battle began. Commander Nathan Cole was not there. He had died on the third day of fighting, when his ship was destroyed covering the retreat of 2 damaged cruisers. His crew had survived because of his sacrifice. He had not. Admiral Monroe stepped forward to address the crowd. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the pain beneath the words. "We came here because we heard a cry for help," she said. "We did not know the Valari. We had no treaties with them. We had nothing to gain from fighting for them. But they needed help, and we answered." She paused and looked out at the sea of Valari faces. Many of them were crying. Many were holding the hands of children who had been saved from the plague. Children who were alive because human doctors had worked day and night to find a cure. 2,000 of our people will never go home, Monroe continued. They will never see their families again. They will never grow old. They gave their futures so that your people can have a future. This is not a debt we ask you to repay. This is a gift we give freely, because it is right. She stepped back, and the Valari orchestra began to play. The music was ancient and beautiful, a song of mourning that the Valari had sung for their dead for 10,000 years. But today, they sang it for humans. After the service, Elder Morvith found Lieutenant Drake standing alone at the edge of the plaza. The Marine was leaning on a crutch, his wounds still healing. His face was solemn as he watched the crowd slowly scatter. "Lieutenant," Morvith said, approaching him carefully, "you should be resting." Drake shook his head. "I wanted to see them. The ones I couldn't save." Morvith understood. He had felt the same way many times, losing patience when he was a young doctor, before he entered politics. The weight of failure never truly went away. "You saved my life," Morvith said. "You saved my entire council. You fought through an army to reach us." "I lost 12 good people getting there," Drake replied. 12 people who trusted me to bring them home." Morvith was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed his hand on the Marine's shoulder. "I have lived for almost 200 years, he said. "I have seen many things. I have known many species. But I have never met anyone like your people. You fight for strangers. You die for those who can give you nothing in return. You carry the weight of your sacrifices with honor and with grief." He looked into Drake's eyes and spoke with absolute sincerity. "Your people are not just warriors. You are something much rarer. You are protectors. And my people will never forget what you have done for us." Drake met the old Valari's gaze. For a moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten just a little. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "That means a lot." In the days that followed, the Valari High Council voted unanimously to request a permanent alliance with the United Earth Federation. The motion passed without a single objection. Even those who had protested the human presence before the battle now spoke in favor of the alliance. The Galactic Coalition, which had ordered the humans to withdraw just days before, quietly approved the treaty. They had watched humanity fight and die for a world that had rejected their help. They had seen something they did not fully understand but could not deny. A Reporter from the Coalition News Service approached Admiral Monroe as she was preparing to depart. Her fleet was gathering in orbit, ready for the long journey home. The wounded were loaded onto medical ships. The dead were carried in sealed containers that would take them back to Earth for burial. "Admiral," the reporter said, "the galaxy is asking questions about what happened here. Many species do not understand why humanity sacrificed so much for the Velari. Can you explain it?" Monroe looked at the reporter with tired eyes. She thought about all the words she could use, all the explanations she could give. She thought about history and politics and strategy, but in the end, she chose the simplest answer. "The Velari expected medical aid," she said. "We brought warships instead. Because sometimes the best medicine is making sure the patient lives long enough to heal." She turned and walked toward her shuttle. Behind her, the reporter stared in silence, trying to understand what he had just heard. On the surface of Ashara Prime, Elder Morvith watched the human fleet rise into the sky. The ships caught the light of the twin suns and glittered like stars ascending to the heavens. Children stood beside their parents and pointed at the departing vessels. These were children who had been dying just weeks ago, now healthy and whole because of human medicine. They waved goodbye to the strangers who had saved them. Morvith raised his own hand in farewell. "Goodbye, my friends," he whispered. "May you find peace. May you find joy. And may the galaxy one day understand what you have shown us today." The ships vanished into the darkness of space. The plaza fell quiet, and the Velari, who had never known war, began the long work of healing. They would build a monument in the plaza. They would write songs about the battle. They would tell stories to their children, and their children's children about the day the humans came. They expected medical aid. They received something far more precious, thought they. Received proof that somewhere in the cold darkness of the universe, there were those who would fight for strangers, die for strangers, and ask nothing in return. They received humanity. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace into chaos. Keth Mara Station hung in the darkness ahead, a massive structure that had once been home to 2 million beings from a dozen different species. Now it was burning. Valkyrie warships surrounded it like wolves circling wounded prey. Laser fire streaked through space. Explosions blossomed in silence. And everywhere, desperate civilian ships tried to flee, only to be shot down by Valkyrie fighters. Commander Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship, the horizon, and felt cold rage settle in his chest. He had seen war before. He had seen cruelty before. But watching helpless civilians being slaughtered while they ran for their lives woke something primal in him. He looked at his crew, saw the same anger in their eyes, and gave an order that would become legendary across the galaxy. Attack immediately. All ships. No hesitation. The 12 human vessels charged into battle without waiting, without planning, without fear. The Valkyrie commanders watched their sensors with confusion. No species attacked them. Everyone ran. Everyone surrendered. These strange ships from an unknown world were doing something impossible. The first Valkyrie cruiser died before its crew understood what was happening. Human missiles, designed to punch through asteroid rock, tore through alien armor like paper. Human pilots flew their fighters in ways that defied reason, pulling turns so sharp that the G-forces should have killed them instantly. But humans had evolved on a heavy world. Their bodies were built to survive forces that would crush other species into paste. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan led a squadron of fighters against a group of Valkyrie bombers heading for the refugee ships. She was a small woman with red hair and a fierce smile, and she had been flying since she was 16 years old. Earth's gravity was nothing compared to what she pulled in that cockpit. She pushed her fighter to its limits and beyond, screaming through maneuvers that made her vision go gray at the edges. A Valkyrie missile found her ship. Half her cockpit was ripped away, exposing her to the vacuum of space. Any other species would have died instantly. Kate held her breath. She remembered her training, remembered that humans could survive in vacuum for almost 2 minutes if they stayed calm. She was not calm. She was furious. But she kept flying anyway. Her targeting computer was destroyed, so she aimed by eye. Her flight suit was torn, so she felt the cold of space seeping into her bones. But she refused to die. She refused to let those bombers reach the civilian ships. She lined up her shot and fired. The lead bomber exploded. Then the second. Then the third. Kate destroyed 5 enemy ships in 90 seconds while holding her breath in hard vacuum. When she finally pulled back to dock with the horizon, her lips were blue and ice crystals had formed on her skin. The medic said she should be dead. She told them she was too angry to die. Meanwhile, Marine Sergeant Chris Dalton was leading a boarding party onto a captured Valkyrie cruiser. The enemy had taken prisoners from the station, and the human fleet was not going to leave them behind. Chris was a big man with gentle eyes and hands that could crush metal. He had joined the Marines to protect people, and today he was going to do exactly that. The Valkyrie were tall creatures, covered in natural armor and sharp spines. They were bred for combat, stronger and faster than most galactic species. They had never lost a ground battle in their entire history. They had never faced humans. Chris and his team cut through the cruiser like a storm. The Valkyrie fought back with everything they had, but nothing they did seemed to work. They shot the humans, and the humans kept coming. They stabbed the humans, and the humans kept coming. One Marine took a blade through his shoulder and simply snapped the blade off, then kept fighting with the broken metal still embedded in his flesh. The Valkyrie soldiers started to panic. Their training had not prepared them for enemies who did not stop. Their instincts screamed at them to run from these monsters who felt pain but ignored it, who bled but refused to fall. For the first time in their conquest of the galaxy, the Valkyrie knew fear. Chris found the prisoners in the lower decks. Hundreds of aliens from the station, mostly Elthians and other peaceful species, huddled in cells. They screamed when they saw him, convinced that another monster had come to hurt them. But then they saw him break the locks with his bare hands. They saw him pick up an injured Althian child with gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature so strong. They heard him speak soft words of comfort in a language they did not understand but somehow felt. The prisoners followed the humans back to the shuttle. Along the way, they saw things they would never forget. They saw humans shielding alien bodies with their own. They saw humans taking wounds meant for others. They saw a species that fought like demons, but protected like angels. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Valkyrie fleet was destroyed. Every single enemy ship was either blown apart or captured. The human fleet had lost 2 ships, hundreds of crew members, and countless fighters. But Kethmara Station was saved. The refugees survived. And across the galaxy, word began to spread. The Confederation forces who had been defending the station stared at their saviors with something between awe and terror. They had read the files about Earth. They had seen the warnings about the Deathworlders. But nothing had prepared them for the reality. These humans had done in 4 hours what the entire Confederation military had failed to do in 6 months of fighting. Commander Torres stood on the station's observation deck after the battle, looking out at the wreckage floating in space. He was tired. He was wounded. He had lost good people today. But he had also saved millions of lives, and that was worth any price. An Althian elder approached him slowly, still afraid of the human despite everything. The elder asked a question that Torres would hear many times in the coming months. She asked how humans could be so deadly and yet so willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers. Torres thought about the question for a long moment. Then he gave the only answer that made sense to him. He said that humans knew what it was like to be afraid. They knew what it was like to be hunted, to be helpless, to watch loved ones die. That was why they fought so hard to protect others, because they remembered what it felt like to need protection themselves. The elder nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but accepting. She welcomed humanity to the galactic stage. She did not know that this was only the beginning. The real war had not yet begun. News of the Battle of Kethmara spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every species, every world, every outpost heard the same incredible story. A fleet of strange creatures from a death world had appeared from nowhere and destroyed a Valkyrie attack force in hours. The invincible conquerors had been beaten. Hope was alive again. Commander Ryan Torres established humanity's forward base on Kethmara Station. The damaged sections were sealed off, and what remained became the headquarters for the growing human presence in the galaxy. Ships from Earth arrived weekly, bringing supplies, weapons, and most importantly, volunteers. Thousands of men and women left everything behind to fight in a war that was not theirs. For people they had never met. Among the new arrivals was Dr. Nathan Cole, a combat medic with 20 years of experience in Earth's worst conflict zones. He was a quiet man with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much death. He came to the station expecting to treat wounded humans. What he found instead changed his understanding of medicine forever. The Confederation species were fragile in ways Nathan could not have imagined. Their bones broke from falls that a human child would laugh off. Their organs failed from stress levels that humans experienced every day. Their immune systems were so weak that a common earth cold could kill them in hours. Nathan realized that to most galactic species, humans were not just tough. They were practically immortal. He set up a medical bay on the station and began treating anyone who needed help. Word spread quickly about the human doctor who could work miracles. Aliens came to him with injuries that their own physicians had given up on. Nathan saved them with techniques that seemed like magic but were just standard Earth medicine applied to bodies that had never evolved to handle real hardship. One day, a Confederation physician named Vartek asked to observe Nathan treating a wounded human Marine. The Marine had taken shrapnel to the chest and needed emergency surgery. Nathan agreed, thinking nothing of it. What happened next became a legend throughout the Confederation medical community. Nathan performed the surgery without anesthesia. The Marine was awake the entire time, gritting his teeth and making occasional jokes about the quality of the station's food. Vartek watched in horror as Nathan cut into living flesh while the patient simply endured. When it was over, Vartek asked how such a thing was possible. Nathan explained that humans had evolved the ability to push through pain when necessary. It was how their ancestors had survived. Vartek spent the next hour in his quarters, trying to process what he had witnessed. He eventually wrote a report that was read by every physician in the Confederation. The report had a simple conclusion. Humans were not like other species. They were something else entirely. Something that had no right to exist, yet existed anyway. Corporal Megan Harris became famous in a different way. She was assigned to protect a group of Althean refugees while they were being evacuated to a safer world. The transport was ambushed by Valkyrie raiders who had slipped through the defensive lines. When the enemy boarded the ship, Megan was the only soldier on board. She held a corridor for 3 hours. The Valkyrie sent wave after wave of soldiers against her, and she killed them all. She was shot 6 times. She was stabbed 4 times. A grenade exploded near her and filled her body with shrapnel. But she would not fall. She could not fall. Behind her were 200 civilians, including children, and she had promised to protect them. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Megan still standing, her weapon empty, her body covered in blood, both hers and alien. The corridor was filled with Valkyrie bodies. She had killed 37 enemy soldiers by herself. The medics counted 17 separate wounds on her body. She should have died at least 5 times over. She survived. The Althians called her the Undying One, and they built shrines in her honor. Megan felt uncomfortable with the attention. She said she had just been doing her job. But the story that truly changed the war involved a young soldier named Ben Castillo. He was only 19 years old, barely out of training, assigned to guard duty at the Confederation High Council chambers. It was supposed to be a safe assignment, a way for a new recruit to get experience without facing real danger. Ben did not expect to become a legend. The Valkyrie had sent an assassination squad to kill the council members. If they succeeded, the Confederation would collapse into chaos, and the war would be lost. The assassins were elite soldiers, the best the Valkyrie had, trained specifically to kill important targets. They bypassed every security system and eliminated every guard in their path. Ben was the last one standing between them and the council doors. His rifle jammed after killing 2 of them. He was alone, unarmed except for his combat knife, facing 6 of the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. He attacked anyway. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Ben moved with a speed and ferocity that the Valkyrie had never encountered. He dodged their attacks by inches, reading their movements with predator instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. His knife found gaps in their armor that they did not know existed. He took wounds that should have stopped him and kept fighting. When reinforcements arrived, they found Ben standing over 6 dead Valkyrie, breathing hard, his knife dripping with alien blood. He had cuts and bruises covering his body, but nothing serious. When Commander Torres asked him how he had managed to kill 6 elite assassins with only a knife, Ben shrugged and said they were slower than he expected. The Valkyrie High Command received the battle reports with growing terror. Their intelligence on humans had been catastrophically wrong. They had expected primitives. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrible. Creatures forged in the fires of a world that should have killed them. Predators who had clawed their way to the top of the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. For the first time in their history, the Valkyrie began to doubt. Their soldiers whispered about the Deathworlders in fearful tones. They spoke of humans who could not be killed, who felt no pain, who fought with the fury of cornered animals. They spoke of monsters from the darkest legends. The tide of war was turning, and the humans were just getting started.